As we move beyond the age of oil and beyond the economy which is driven by the age of oil, we enter an entirely new world, and there really, frankly, are no experts anywhere who can come forward and say exactly what we do in this situation. It's entirely new to everybody's experience. There are no investors who can say, this is a good investment in this situation. There are no politicians who can say, this is how we should behave in this situation. Even in a humble business way, there is no business that can plan its future, because every single aspect of its future is going to change. And so we're left with a sort of vacuum. Yeah, I suddenly got a call in the middle of the day. An American voice said,
Dick Haynes here, Office of U.S. Naval Intelligence.
And he said, I'm by the phone box. So my son-in-law was with me, and we walked down the hill here, got to the phone box, and there was nobody in sight. Nobody there at all. And I looked around looking for this person. And then across the road, I saw a man standing with dark glasses and a hat, standing like this, just sort of looking around like this, didn't react, didn't say anything, just looked. And I walked across to him and said, are you looking for me? And he said, no, but those that are in the shop opposite. And so I came over to the shop. And it was this shop here, inside which was a man about 50 with two women. And he was effusive and said, hi, nice to see you and everything. Can I buy you a drink? So we walked up the road to Coughlin's bar up here, followed behind by the man in the dark glasses. It was a scene from a movie, you could say.
We know who you are. We're watching what you're doing. We're very interested in what you're doing. That's a sign that he's on to something. And the way such things works, and I know because I've been at this 25 years, and I've had several contacts like that in 25 years, some a lot less pleasant, is that it's also telling you you're onto something. And in a way it's saying keep going, because we want to know where you go and what you find out. But they also very much want to know, the primary interest of CIA, let's say, is not whether peak oil is real or not. It's how close is the ASPO to penetrating the public consciousness with the issues of peak oil, and how close is the public to acknowledging what it's going to mean.
What matters is when production will begin to decline. That is the devastating turning point facing the modern world, which runs on oil. I doubt that today there is any real spare capacity anywhere, and probably another price shock is building right now. We're already going through the 30s. It may trigger a new, deeper recession, which may in turn dampen demand and take the pressure off price. These vicious circles give a volatile few years before the decline sets in and is perceived as such.
It's important for our country to understand, I think most Americans do, that we import over half of our crude oil stocks from abroad. And sometimes we import that oil from countries that don't particularly like us. Puts us at it jeopardizes our national security to be dependent on sources of energy from countries that don't care for America, what we stand for, what we love.
My position is that everything that's happened since 9/11 is, and including 9/11, is a result of peak oil. It's caused by peak oil because they know that it's coming. according to the map that I've made all these predictions, and they've all been proven correct. Dick Cheney called this a war that will not end in our lifetimes. And by October, November of 2001, after 9/11, I was saying this is a war that will be a sequential war to control the last remaining oil reserves on the planet. And it will go from Afghanistan, Pakistan, where there's natural gas pipelines and oil pipelines in the Caspian Basin. It will go to Iraq. It will go to Saudi Arabia. It will go to West Africa. It will go to Colombia. And that's exactly the way the map is unfolding.
Hello there. Well, back in Stavanger, I first came to Stavanger in 1980, and I was exploration manager of Amoco then. And really the early days of the North Sea in Norway. There was prolific source rocks laid down 150 million years ago. A very unique epoch in geological history, and we began to understand this. We could map where it was. And we began to find the giant fields. And the peak of discovery in the North Sea as a whole was 1973. Of course, at the time, we didn't realize that. We thought we were on the brink of something that would go on forever. You have to find oil before you produce it. So although the discovery had peaked, the production was still rising from these early finds. And in terms of production, which is really the only element that anyone takes note of, the real peak didn't arrive until about now. The UK has now gone over the top in 1999, and now it's declining at about 6% a year. And Norway is going to follow the same pattern. It's over the top. Just about now it's at the top. So that Norway's production is set to fall by about a half within 10 years. And I'm so pleased, in a way, to see that the Norwegian government, the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, now accepts this. They plot graphs showing this exactly.
Vi I en situasjon nå hvor vårt redskap for å forstå hva som under overflaten I sedimentbassengene dramatisk forbedret, men man finner mindre og mindre.
This is a dying industry.
Peak oil, det noe som professor Hubbert introduserte, hvor han påstod at etter at 50% av en ressurs var produsert, så ville det være umulig å øke produksjonen ytterligere. Da vil du komme til, etter at halvparten av ressursene produsert, så vil du få en reduksjon I produksjonen uansett hvor mye penger og teknologi du satte inn I å produsere de resterende gjenværende reserver.
And if our world was limited to Norway, and of course many people working in Norway, the only place they do know is Norway, but gradually you see the same picture unfolding in one country after another. And slowly we're beginning to get this global view of things that, well, everywhere you turn to is facing sooner or later the same pattern that has already happened in the United States. Discovery peaked in 1930, production in 1970. It's now extremely mature. Production is falling and nothing can change it. And so when we look at the world as a whole, it's simply made up of these component parts. And we find that the peak of discovery for the world as a whole was in 1964. And that by around 2010, you can't put an exact date on it because it depends on consumption, which in turn depends on demand and recession. But generally speaking, around 2010, the world reaches its top, and after that, production has to start falling, and it cannot be reversed. It just falls forever and ever and ever, and it falls, I would guess, at between 2 and 3% a year.
The conventional wisdom in markets is that, hey, oil's going to run out in the year 2100, therefore it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when it runs out to the last drop. What matters is what happens when there is less tomorrow than there is today. When a market reaches an extremity, you tend to get volatility at the top. And basically one of the things that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years in the oil market particularly is that even the slightest amount of production being shut down, maybe 50,000 or 100,000 barrels of oil due to a tropical storm in the Mexican Gulf, this is having a disproportionate effect on an energy market where we're consuming possibly the equivalent of 150, 160 million barrels of oil a day. In my experience, in my opinion, from working for some of the largest investment banks in the world, when we see this kind of behaviour in markets, it would tend to endorse what Colin Campbell and the ASPO are basically saying, that we are near the peak.
Og hvis du ser rundt omkring i verden, så får du nå meldinger fra her og der, og hvis du følger med de daglige meldingene om at nå begynner man å nedjustere reserveanslag. Og det er liksom de første sånne små tegnene på at man begynner å nå en slags topp.
Hi. How are you?
Fine, hi.
Probably not the best car to be showed on camera.
Doing all right? Are you ready?
I'm ready, yeah.
Okay, I'm coming in.
If you was to sit down and think of the number of people involved in the supplying your everyday needs and where they're located, it's obvious that the world economy is inextricably linked. Everybody's dependent on each other. Therefore, a shock in one part of the system will be transmitted to other parts of the system. So I think it's very. Maybe they feel that it's too, we can't do anything about it, or we're too. It's not our problem, but it is their problem. And no one is independent in the global market. Everybody has bought into the same concept, and anybody who tries to make a stand and not be in that system is their companies, their assets, their competitiveness is punished.
What we're facing is the beginning of the decline. And what is so interesting out of that is that from our mindset today, everybody is used to growth. We all live on the expectation of growth. We expect our salaries to rise. We expect everything to grow around us as it has done in the last 50 years. And this growth of the past has been made possible by the cheap energy that has been available. And now we face a change.
When we start the transformation process from where we are and where we've got to go, we will see massive competition between companies as they realise the energy productivity miracle they can embark on, how they can save or use the resources they've got in a more efficient, productive way. A company that embraces that is going to see its share price highly valued. A company that ignores the consequences is going to find that it just simply goes out of business. Its share price will be trashed out of sight, to be quite honest.
Peak oil and the implications it has if we haven't prepared for it are, in particularly if you think that it's an event that might be happening now or 3 or 4 years from now or even 10 years from now, is so utterly serious on society that it's, in my opinion, if global warming gets placed as a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 12. We have no spare capacity. We have no way to address fixing spare capacity, and demand is now a runaway train, which means it's growing too fast and it's not slowing down at all because of the high prices. And so demand is just about to exceed supply, and supply will always equal use.
we need to face the possibility that we would have to give a much larger role to government. The government would find itself almost in a wartime situation in which it was going to have to allocate resources, in which it was going to have to ration it out, which in turn means that they've got to decide which uses would have priority and which uses wouldn't. The prime function of any government is to provide security in the land, so obviously both the military and the police would have to have prior access to fuel. You cannot simply let the price mechanism bid the price higher and higher, because you would bankrupt the state if you did that.
I have probably spoken out on these issues as much as anybody on earth the last couple of years. And so if I weren't concerned about it, I certainly wouldn't basically be doing all of the speaking I have, and so often being deemed to be just utterly pessimistic and utterly controversial. And so now I'm just trying to basically tell you these are energy facts as I know them. If we understand, that there's an interesting definition if you look up the Oxford English Dictionary about what the word crisis means. The word crisis is a series of problems that went unattended until they became terminal. I actually think that the faster we open our eyes to these problems, and the faster we start doing about them, then the less painful the problems will be. And they don't need to basically destroy our society. But if we actually leave them unattended, then they will.
This is our first speaker meeting on the theme of oil depletion. And the purpose of our group is to sort of raise the profile of the energy crisis and particularly argue the case for much stronger government policies in terms of the productivity of our energy use or energy efficiency.
Without a source, there is nothing to find, no matter how hard you look, no matter what technology you exploit. Unless you've got something to find, you obviously can't find it. And the world, I suggest, has now been sufficiently explored to know, more or less, where all the source rocks are. Remember that all company accounts tacitly assume a business-as-usual supply of cheap energy on which their business depends. Well, it isn't going to be there much longer. And the financial community now does indeed begin to wake up. You'd be surprised how many banks are in touch with me these days.
Yes, well, it was successful to the extent that it happened at all, and about, I suppose, 20 or 30 MPs came, and there was a positive reaction, but the minister himself did not come, evidently being warned that this was a subject it was better not to be publicly associated with. On the other hand, Michael Meacher, the previous member of Blair's government, was there and was very enthusiastic. And you find that politicians out of office are able to understand and react positively, but those in office are more cautious. And if one was generous, one could say that they understand very well the situation, but find it politically impossible to exactly come out and describe it, for fear that the statement might cause the panic which they are working to prevent.
There's a direct link between population growth, energy consumption and economic activity. So if energy, if the available supply of energy is constrained, this has consequences for economic growth, but population trends will carry on for quite some time after basically the energy supply starts to struggle to meet demand. So that will accentuate the situation further.
We're not talking about something 100 years off or some speculation or some sort of doomsday story, because the facts are now in front of us, and it's coming quite soon. And I think what is perhaps more interesting than the event itself is the perception of it coming. And we don't have to ask much about that. Look at the Middle East, these famous weapons of mass destruction that Bush and Blair said they were going after. Well, nobody's found them, and I don't think anybody thinks they exist. So what was the motive? And I don't think nobody would doubt that it was oil. So already we are seeing indirect reflections of this growing perception of this dramatic situation that's unfolding.
Jeg tror, basert på de reservene som tilgjengelige, og med en viss sunn skepsis til blant annet de politisk oppjusterte reservene i Midtøsten, og til en del av de forventningene om olje man skal finne merkelige steder, så tror jeg vi nå nærmer oss at vi har utvunnet omtrent halvparten av den oljen som tilgjengelig, og at du når en topp. Det betyr ikke at dagen etter så det køer ved bensinpumpene, men det betyr bare at du får en oppadstigende press på prisene hele tiden, og at i verste fall, så fra et miljøsynsvinkel, så går man da ut over til å bruke kull, for eksempel. I mange steder, Kina blant annet, det stor tilgjengelighet på kull. Så det ikke positivt, eller det negativt når vi kommer til det tidspunktet.
You see this shell here? This is the limpet. Patella is its scientific name. That shell is not changed for 500 million years. This little limpet discovered a happy way to live on the rocks that was sustainable. The waves washed over it, it found enough to live on, and it was happy. But some descendants of this limpet found a friendly pool to live in. They became sophisticated, they changed, they became extraordinarily successful, they proliferated, they grew, and they were very, very successful in this little pool until suddenly geological conditions changed, climate changed, and the pool dried up. Now these sophisticated descendants didn't find out how to go back to the simplicity of the little limpet, and they died out. One can say that Darwin didn't wear a watch. He understood evolution, and he understood the survival of the fittest. This concept has a huge impact in the way we live today. But since he didn't wear a watch, he didn't take into account the time factor. Who is successful for a moment in a short span of time is different from he who is successful in a long period of time. And one can say that even in today's world of invasions and battles and wars, sure, you can win a battle, but do you really win a war? This is something we can ask ourselves these days.
Energi det moderne samfunnets oksygen. Så du finner jo ikke noen virksomhet som av en størrelse som man kan investere i, som ikke i stor grad energiavhengig.
Travel industry, the airline industry, these people will be the first to feel the pinch. When it affects transport, when it affects the price of moving goods, it's going to feed through the whole system.
It's no use if you suddenly come in and raise the price of oil arbitrarily, then people will react and they'll feel cheated and they will feel resentful and there'll be demonstrations, which we've already seen. If, on the other hand, you were able to explain to people that this was not a conspiracy by oil companies or governments or OPEC or Middle East, but was simply a feature of nature, then I think people would be much more sympathetic to the situation. They would not demonstrate in reaction and do their best to contribute in some useful way. The use of oil varies enormously from country to country. In America, for example, on average, each person consumes as many as 27 barrels. If you look at the other end of the scale, you find that the Indians use less than 1 barrel. So there's a huge range between the affluent West and the so-called Third World. But given the fact that the West now depends so completely on this flow of cheap energy, and it is depleting and depleting fast, the people who suffer most are in fact going to be the Western countries, the big consumers. The Indians can go on for more or less forever living their way of life because they're not dependent upon it. The whole economy, the whole financial system is built on growth. That's how it functions, the assumption of growth. And so to turn that around in the financial sense, it takes a lot of adjustment, a lot of work, a lot of thought to find a new system that will match the reality that is imposed by nature.